Good morning. I'm overwhelmed by what Susan shared. And it reminds me that there are so many people in the audience today that I have crossed paths with in my journey around aging. I feel like I'm with my tribe here today. It just feels very comfortable. So Dominic asked me to talk about aging and technology. And maybe because I worked at IDEO and I was around a lot of young designers, and also because of my relationship with Aging 2.0, where I spend a lot of time with startups and the tech world and try to understand the connections between aging and technology and healthcare. So as I think about this topic, I'm brought to this point of technology, and what's going on here is almost overwhelming. Things are moving so quickly and with so much of a pace, and I would include science in this as well, that it leads me to think about it, first of all, from a very personal perspective. So if we think about technology today, but I want to frame it in the future and the past, because I think we need to ground ourselves there. How many of you are old enough to remember the Jetsons? Ah, good. I'm in good company here. I was reflecting on the Jetsons because when I was watching them, they started in 1962. But it was about 2062. That was the time frame. So if you remember any of the episodes, and I highly recommend going back and watching them, because you will see windows into the future that are very interesting, and I'll give you an example. I remember very specifically watching an episode where Jane, the mother, was trying to figure out what was wrong. Elroy was sick, her son. And there's a scene in that particular episode where I got my first glimpse at telemedicine, because Jane and Elroy are talking to a doctor on a screen and asking questions about his health and what exactly is wrong with him. Now, I didn't know it in the moment that I watched it, but I really knew it when I went back and watched it again. And I think, it's those kinds of reflections, what's going on around us today in the Bay Area, not only in aging, but in everything around science and technology, really gives you pause to reflect about the past and the future. Now, we don't have flying cars yet. We may have self-driving ones, like the Jetsons had. The Jetsons had a robot. But it's just interesting to me to try to set everything in a context and really begin to understand what have we learned from the past and what do we aspire to in the future as it relates to our aging selves, and how can technology help us, and how can business begin to address those needs. So I always like to start with a personal story. So if in the past it was the Jetsons, today it's superheroes. And we all think about who would we like to be as a superhero, and also what are the superpowers that we would like to have? What can technology bring to us? And my good friend Barbara, who is a personal superhero, she was the one who introduced me to this idea of wanting superpowers and framing it in that way. And one of the things that Barbara gave as an example of a superpower that she wanted from technology, and she believed technology should give her, was a pair of glasses that could facial recognize the people coming up to her, and it had an earbud that would whisper in her ear and tell her who was coming towards her. Because in fact, Barbara has macular degeneration. She is legally blind, but she doesn't let that slow her down. In fact, she puts a lot of pressure on designers to really begin to respond to those needs. And so her superpower is this special pair of glasses and an earbud. So I would ask all of you to think for a minute, what is this superpower that you would like to have as you age? And you have Post-its, as Dominic said, so think about what are the superpowers that we need to have, that business and technology needs to bring to us. And, what would it be for you? It could be something that allows us to see ourselves at any age, like this example. This is from a designer at IDEO. We did an internal point of view piece around aging. We do it every year on a topic, and it's called Designs On, and you can see it online. It's always available. Aging was a topic a few years ago, and so we asked our designers to blue sky design around aging. And this was one of the examples. Another superpower might be, what if a part of each of us could live forever? How can we think about where science and technology intersect and what it means in looking back in science from the days of Henrietta Lacks and a lot of the other things that are happening now with 23andMe? How do we think about our lives and when they really do end, or how do they continue? So think about your superpowers. What would you like? All right, so we've reflected on superpowers. Now let's talk about today. What's really happening today? Start with the good news. There are new technologies literally being created daily that can, and I emphasize can, they have the potential to improve the lives of people as they age. That's pretty impressive. And I started a list, and the list could go on and on. But if I think about the things that I know that are going on right now, or the things that are changing, think about touchscreens, voice-enabled. We can talk to our devices now. We have tremendous ability to store data. We have sensors that we can actually swallow. We have communication platforms that are beyond our wildest dreams of ways to communicate. We have 3D printing. We have wearable technology. We're starting to use gestures as a form of interaction. Soon we'll be driving cars with gestures. We have AI and robotics. And we have the Internet of Things. And there are many, many more. This is a very short list, in fact. That's impressive. There's a lot going on, and much of it is going on right now here in the Bay Area. There's a little bit of a caveat in that it's not always, as a designer, I have to say this, the best designed things in the world. And there's a lot of thought put into the technology, but not always a great amount of thought put into the design. So hopefully and thankfully it is getting better. We are starting to think differently about some of these things. And that's all great news. But I want to pause here and say, it's great news, but with it comes a big risk. And particularly when you're designing for older adults or thinking about the intersection of technology and older adults. So I would add the however. There is a double-edged sword here. While it can help, there are lots of risks. Exclusion and isolation. If you're not tech savvy, you're not included in many cases. And despite many, many efforts to sort of elevate this tech savviness of older adults, it's been challenging. The good news is my generation, I'm a boomer, I don't use that term very often. I'm 66. My generation embraces technology or tries to. So maybe some of that will get better, maybe not. There's huge issues of privacy and huge issues of security. and lots of conversation, not only around an older population, but even a younger one. If you're aware of in the media recently, and efforts that are going on in Silicon Valley around children and social media and being online and trying to begin to navigate that, which has issues of its own. But I think it is a double-edged sword, and we need to be incredibly mindful of that. So now I can talk about the not-so-good news. And some of my co-presenters here have already touched on some of them. We still think of aging as decline. A lot of what is going on in business and technology right now is design, well-meaning, but very paternalistic, and thinking from a mindset of taking care of us. So that paradigm needs to radically shift. We have many examples. My sort of superhero, Barbara, folks like Carol, who have shown us that there is so much still to be done and that they are still very, very engaged in it. So why do we continue to think this way? There is still a priority on the young. We actually discriminate against our future selves. It's just a reality. We have to stop it. Good design is not always seen as important. Good technology is seen as important, but sometimes at the risk of sacrificing a lot of other things. There's a lot of unmet needs still. It's still not being addressed. Social isolation, purpose, a lot of these things aren't money makers, so there's not a lot of effort put in there. We have a lot of old systems and old models, Social Security, our education system, how we think about lifelong learning, how we think about working. All of these things have to shift and change. And we have very fragmented approaches. In the world of technology, we have amazing devices, but they don't talk to each other. There's no common platform yet. There are starting to be a few, but we have worlds of distance to go to get to that. So it's not that needs aren't being met, but I would question whether it's adequate, and it's certainly not disruptive. So what needs to happen? There definitely needs to be a shift. We're all living longer. We have to think differently. And most importantly, my first sort of most important is we have to design with, not for older adults. And this is the language that I use a lot with startups that I work with, of helping them to understand just because you have a personal story, that's not something to build your business around. You know, I'm sorry, but, you know, I really appreciate that you empathize, but, you know, you can't build a business around that. You really need to have older adults be a part of that conversation and help you to craft what you're doing. It's about people, not an age group. To Susan's point, we have to stop labeling. We all have passions, we all have desires, we all have things that we want to accomplish. So it is about our lifestyle and our life stage and what we want to have happen within our lifetimes. It is not about our age, and we just really have to get past that. And it's about interdependence, not independence. I think as a culture in the US, we have taught people that independence is the goal. And so we have a lot of older adults who don't want to be a burden. That's not the conversation we should be having. We should be talking about how, as Encore.org talks very much about these days, generation to generation, how do we in fact connect the generations more? How do we help each other? You know, and I quite often say to my adult children who are in their 20s and 30s, I don't want them to get to my age and be facing the same things that I'm facing today. My goal is, I don't know how much I can change in my lifetime, but I want to make sure that by their lifetime, when they are my age, it's not the same story, that these things have been rewritten. So I would argue that this shift is about keeping older adults, and I would say probably everyone, not just older adults, mobile, engaged, healthy, and connected. That's the aspiration of technology and the businesses that are working to bring new technologies to us, and to be accessible, to make sure that it serves everyone. As a designer, I was taught that if you design for an older adult and a mother with a baby, you've designed for everyone. And so if we're designing for older adults, then we're designing for everyone, and that's what's really important. And of course, don't forget the superpowers. Thank you.